So, like, we're not a low-lying area. We've been here since 1931 and have never flooded. Ever, never, ever flooded. It's never made it into my building. It's never made it into my office. It's never made it into my grandparents, great-grandparents, and now brother's house. Ever. Other than the basement. Every basement floods. Every basement floods when it rains. Never. Half of his house is unlivable right now. He's not living in his house. He's living in a rental unit a couple towns north in Seagirt because he can't live in his house. Because the one whole half of the house, and the water actually wrapped around his house and ended up in the street. So, I mean, when people talk about how, well, you know, down by the shore it floods, wrong. That's not true. Anything by the water will be the first thing to get hit, but you're talking literally water levels that have never been seen here in nearly a century, and who knows how long it was before then. Nobody knows before then. But that house that has stood for nearly 100 years had parts of the house flooded that have never seen water in its entire lifetime. So this is way beyond. It was the storm surge is what did all the damage. The wind was not what did most of the damage, because again, we've had hurricanes with far more wind than this thing had.
Right.
We've had hurricanes with far more rain. Irene last year dumped 3-4 times as much rain on us as this one did. We spent most of the night out here without even having to wear our rain gear because there was very little rain involved with it. And there were some nasty winds, don't get me wrong, but not like Hugo, not like Andrew, not like a lot of other, you can name lots of hurricanes. Even ones up here, Camille back in the 60s, and hurricanes with far more wind. But they didn't happen to hit. The eye didn't make landfall at high tide on a full moon after 2 days of a nor'easter that came before it. It was all of those. I mean, we saw barometer levels that no one's ever seen before here, how low it was. So it was a set of circumstances that's why I had said to you at the beginning, if this storm had gone a couple hundred miles north or a couple hundred miles south when it made landfall, you wouldn't have seen the kinds of issues that we had here.
How did your fleet do?
The boats did fine. Well, we stayed with the boats. I was here from 5:30 Monday morning until 6 o'clock Tuesday night. We never left, and there was a couple of us on each of the boats because you have to stay here to adjust for the tides and adjust the lines and all that kind of stuff. I had 3 boats hang on pilings the big pilings you see behind us right there. You see the highest piling sticking up right there.
Right.
That one I just had added. The next lowest one was the piling that my boat caught on, which the boat has never been over that before. We've had boats sitting here since literally the 30s, and no boat's ever gone that high.
Right.
So we had to work to get the boats off the pilings and adjust lines and that kind of stuff. What hit us here specifically at my basin was the gray building you see behind you is my catering facility for my 2 riverboats. Well, the water was up to the bottom of the windowsills. The white bottom of the windowsills, you see, that's how high the water was. So I lost all my equipment, because again, that building has stood there since before this bridge was here. And this bridge was built in 1948. The old bridge used to be where you drove into the parking lot. It was a diner for 60 years and never flooded.
Right.
And we had 2 feet of water in the building. So what we had done the day before the hurricane, well, several days before, was we had lifted everything up higher than the tide from the perfect storm. Because prior to Sandy, the perfect storm was the highest tides anyone had seen here since the 1920s or 1930s that we know of, because that's how long we've been here. So you figure you see the highest thing ever, and you go beyond it to try and compensate for, well, just in case it's as bad as that one or even a little worse, you'll go, well, it was way beyond worse. It was beyond anything anyone has ever seen. So a lot of the damage you see, if you've been down, I don't know if you've had access to down in Manalocan or Ortley Beach and those kind of places that those are all the things you've seen the aerial footage of.
Right.
I know people in California that, wow, I saw the Manalocan Bridge on TV, or what was left of it. Those areas there, which are very difficult still to get into right now, a lot of the damage that was caused wasn't from wind. It wasn't even necessarily from waves. It was simply from water. Water that literally lifted houses up and then dropped them back down in a different spot, and they broke in half because they were no longer sitting on their foundation. And it was also the rush of the water. If you've seen the video footage of the water when it was rushing into the tunnels in New York,
right.
The streets were dry, other than rain. And then all of a sudden the water got high enough where it came up, and then it all came over at once. So, not that current and waves and stuff weren't an issue. They obviously are anytime you're along the beach. But the single biggest factor was the level of water that was brought in. My 2 riverboats, which are the boats I run now. I worked on the fishing boats the first half of my life, and now I run the riverboats, and I manage our fishing boats still too. I'm pulling up a picture to give you an example. We cruise up the Manasquan River through the Point Pleasant Canal down into Barnegat Bay. Well, the first trip that I did after the hurricane, which was somebody's birthday party that was supposed to sail right around that weekend, and they postponed it, of course. I went to the other end of the Point Pleasant Canal and had to turn around and come right back because I can't go down into Barnegat Bay, which we are the intercoastal waterway, by the way. This is the northernmost entrance, our inlet of the intercoastal. And I was talking to one of the customers, and he said, boy, I was really hoping to go down into the bay and see what things look like. I haven't been here since the summertime. I come here every year and blah, 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 blah. I said, well, even in the daytime, I couldn't risk it because there's so much debris and stuff in the water that, we can't risk running into something. But at night, I would never even consider it. So I had to stick with just the areas that we knew were clear. And he said, I really wanted to go in the bay. I said, well, I can't go in the bay because that's in my way.
Wow.
Someone's house that was pushed off of its foundations drifted right. I can send you the picture too. And drifted right across the channel. And the best way I can describe it to you is as we're heading down towards the Manasquan Bridge, and the bridge is in front of me, a half a mile away. There's land on my left, which the houses closest to me are at the base side of Route 35, which no longer exists down there right now. And depending on the area, some places it's 2 or 3 blocks deep, some places it's 6 or 8 blocks deep. You cross, and then there's the ocean front on the other side. So that part of the house that you just looked at in that picture wasn't the side that I would see on the water when I passed by. It was the back of the house because it drifted across like this until it hit shallow water. So we were actually looking at the street-facing side of that home, not the water-facing side of that home.
Right.
And that's what happened was, the barrier islands there is no Highway 35. Most of it's covered in sand or was ripped up. And, the Manasquan Bridge, which is a brand new bridge, they replaced the old one not long ago. The houses landed up against the bridge, literally laid up against the bridge. It cut in the inlet that the storm cut through there is an inlet that by all, accounts and there's maps and stuff, it was a natural inlet, centuries ago. That was the single biggest issue was floodwaters, the likes of which no one has ever seen before. So, when I've heard lots of people say, well, down close to the water, I'm sure you guys always get flooded. No, we don't. We wouldn't be here if it flooded like that, even close to that. So the perfect storm, again, was the single highest tide anyone had ever seen. And this thing was 3-4 feet higher than the perfect storm tides were. The perfect storm tides made it up to around the doorway that you see there in my catering facility.
I was living right up the street here.
Oh, when that storm, well, see, then you would have known.
Yeah.
And this blew that away.
Right.
So, we were lucky in the sense that our boats all survived because the boats are what, help us make our living. They're the money makers themselves. The problem is that, all of them, for our business in particular, and it's the same with a lot of the businesses around here, all of the money that normally carries us through the winter was gone in less than 30 days after the storm because we had to pay to fix everything. I lost all my inventory. I lost all our machinery, the drill presses and the chum grinders and all the power. Stuff that those sheds down on the dock where the tide ever got in there was a foot, just above the floor level because they're higher than the dock level, of course. Everything is built on a marina to be higher than the highest tide that you would typically get. And then when you get a storm tide, you have to take things that you can normally leave down low and lift them up higher, which is what we've done with every kind of storm that's ever come through. Knowing what the perfect storm had done, we went a couple feet higher than that tide, figuring, well, it was the worst in a century. Right. What are the odds of getting 2 worst of the centuries in the same century?
Have you
lost it all?
Have you heard from FEMA?
Well, FEMA doesn't talk to businesses. FEMA only deals with individuals. The only thing we have at our disposal is low-interest loans from the Small Business Administration.
SBA.
FEMA, yeah, right. FEMA does, which we're in the process of working on. But FEMA does not give money to businesses.
Well,
when you call FEMA,
I do know. Under George Bush, SBA really screwed over a lot of people down in New Orleans, and I did read recently that the SBA before the storm, that the SBA was changing their way.
Well, hopefully that'll
making it more.
We're still in the application process. Our information has been sent in, but we haven't heard anything back yet. But even a low interest loan, which don't get me wrong, and anything helps, but that's assistance for a business, which is awesome. That if you can get a low interest loan that you might not otherwise get from a bank to help pay to fix things and get you back on your feet, you still got to pay back.
Right.
It's not like somebody with a home or something with FEMA where whatever money you get, they're giving you money. That doesn't happen for business. That
you mentioned it earlier. The big businesses, they don't mind bailing out big businesses with and half the time not asking for the money back.
And the FEMA and SBA people because I called FEMA originally not knowing how to deal with this. And once you're all done talking with the person at FEMA, then they inform you that because it's a business, you have to deal with the Small Business Administrator, which you don't have to go through FEMA as a business. You can just go directly to the SBA. I wasn't aware of that. So I called FEMA first because that's what we did that's what everybody else was doing after the storm. And really nice people. And the same thing with the SBA people. Got to be some of the nicest people I've talked to in a long time. Sent an email one night. This was before we had phone. I was one of the few people in the family that still had phone service and internet service right after the storm. Like my father and his wife were out of power for 14 days before they finally got power back.
Wow.
But so I was one of the lucky ones. I was only out for 48 hours. So at any rate, I had sent an email at night, and then the next morning when I came to work here, once I got my crew going on, continuing the cleanup, I just called on the phone. Well, about an hour after I was done on the phone speaking to a woman, a real nice lady who answered all my questions and even gave me some information that I hadn't gleaned myself from the information on the internet, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize on my cell phone. So I answered it, and it was the woman that was answering the emails. And she said, I was going to send you an email back, but I figured you were still cleaning up, so I just took your cell number you'd put down and figured I'd call you. And I said, oh, great, I already spoke to so-and-so at I don't remember her name now. I mean, just, you couldn't ask for nicer people.
Oh, that's good.
You really couldn't. So that was great. But, they're the worker bees. They're not going to be the ones that are going to make the decisions. But, boy, it was so nice to have a friendly voice, on the phone. So everybody and everyone I've talked to, the people they've dealt with FEMA, all the different local businesses around here that have hosted meetings with FEMA and SBA over the course of the last month or so, where they would come in, hey, there's going to be a meeting here for if you have questions. They did it at the Brick Community Center down where I live in Bricktown. They did it over at the White Sands Motel a few weeks ago over in Point Pleasant. Everybody has been fantastic. So, I don't think you're going to hear a whole lot of complaints about the way FEMA and the SBA dealt with it. Now, what happens in the end and how successful people are in getting assistance, well, that'll make a difference. But the people on the ground...
And that's the point I was making.
Right, oh, absolutely. I knew where you were going with it, sure.
No, I'm hearing that there's change as far as being more efficient and having it work.
Not having had to have dealt with it before, I can't speak from experience, but my experience to date has been the people on the ground,
right,
and the adjusters coming in, and the people answering the phones, and the people walking you through how to fill out, have been fantastic. So that's
I'm going to be back up here asking how they're treating it.
Yeah, we'll find out soon enough. But yeah, that's the hard part is because we're a business, there's no relief. There's just assistance that you still got to pay back. But again, boy, is that if we can get these to help us through, because we literally went through the money that we normally keeps us through the wintertime when business is much quieter, was gone in less than 30 days. I mean, just the first 8 days after the storm, I had a crew of 9 to 12 here, 7 days a week. Well, it was 8 days in a row, from 8 in the morning until dark. We worked because we had no power for the first 8 or 9 days. So while the boats have their own source of power with their generator, obviously because they go out in the ocean, there was no power here in the parking lot, so we can only work during daytime hours. And a crew of 9 to 12 guys that I'm paying for what worked out to be about 9 hours a day, that normally wouldn't have been doing anything but going out on the boat, working when they're on the boat, and that pays for itself with customers. Well, the boats couldn't sail, and nobody could get here. So it's not just the lost business that any business would have had from having no electricity and having no power, people not being able to get down here. That's a big enough of an impact on a business to begin with that you can't operate. But then on top of that, while you're not operating, you're spending money hand over fist to try and fix and repair all of the damage that was done in the first place. So
how was your crew?
It's going to be a long, cold winter. 2 of my crew are still living on one of my boats because they can't go back to the places that they live in. Jim, that lives in an apartment that's just a few blocks from the ocean in Point Pleasant, and Wayne, that was living in a rental house that was a few blocks in from the beach in Manasquan, still can't get into their places. So they've literally been living on one of my boats since the day of the hurricane.
Wow.
Because we have power, on the boats because they have their own. Well, now we have electricity, but even for that first 8-10 days, we just ran the generators 24/7 on the boats. So they got heat, and they got running water. They don't have hot water, so that makes it they got to run to a friend's house to take a shower and stuff. But and Jim, actually, he's not fully back in his apartment, but just before the weekend, his apartment building got all of its power back, most of its hot water back, started getting their heat back, as they're replacing all the furnaces and hot water heaters and boilers and that kind of stuff. So he's only here part-time because until his heat was running full, but it gets a little cold at night. So we let him come down here, but Wayne is still living on the boat and he doesn't know how soon he's going to get back. You can't you can't beg, buy, or borrow a rental or a hotel room or anything around here right now because so many people have been displaced.
Right.
So, my crew, we call it the Hotel Jamaica Star because that's where they were staying for so long, All right, I got to hit the road, my friend.